Nothing like a little pretenders to get you started for a deep, resounding conversation around the critical factors to building strong analytics for sales, marketing, and customer success. I had the honor and privilege to do some prep work with everybody on here, so I know how fun and intense the conversation is going to get. I am going to let each person introduce themselves real quickly, and then we'll get into the conversation. So Billy, why don't you go ahead and, I should mention that Billy is pinch hitting today. They brought in the clutch hitter. Pete Caputa, unfortunately, was unable to make it today, so he passes on his best, but he has given somebody, provided somebody from the team that is going to more than contribute. So Billy, why don't you introduce everybody to who you are?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for joining us here today. Looking forward to learning and sharing a bit of what I've learned about using data and analytics. So right now, I'm currently Director of Sales here at DataBox. So we're a reporting software solution, mostly focused on working with marketing agencies. And I've previously spent time at both HubSpot and Klaviyo.
HubSpot, Klaviyo, and DataBox. That's kind of like the SaaS Trinity, isn't it?
Yeah, I like to think so. Sure.
There you go. All right. Raj is bringing some international flavor to us today. Raj up in Toronto today. Raj, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So co-founder and CEO of Demand Sage. In a nutshell, we take your HubSpot data, put it into Google Sheets, give you a reporting dashboard from there, as well as some tools to derive intelligence from your sales and marketing data. Prior to this, I was co-founder and CEO of Localytics, which was a mobile app analytics and messaging platform. We were working there. We started in the SMB space, ended up working with large enterprises, and that company was acquired about a year ago by Upland Software.
Very cool. And in the most important slot in the lineup, batting third, Todd, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, sure. I'm Todd Abbott. I'm the CEO here at Insight Squared. I joined the company over the last 18 months. I've been a global CRO, sales and marketing exec for mid-cap, large-cap tech firms. And what we do here at Insight Squared, big change. Some of you may know us as a dashboarding company in front of your CRM system. Big pivot to really focus on machine learning to be able to get all of the engagement data from your team to the customer and be able to really assess the quality of a deal, the quality of your funnel, to drive tactical execution, as well as drive the strategic cross-functional alignment on sales process improvement.
Raj, all we need to do is add Henry to this, and this webinar would go, about 3.5, 4 hours.
A lot louder.
That's right. We'll dig in, right? So I asked everybody here to keep the introductions about themselves brief. After all, it is show business, not tell business. I think you'll learn a whole lot about them through the conversation. So I'm going to ask a question for each person to kind of open this up. Then I'm going to follow up, and we're going to get deep into we're going to let the conversation go from there, and make sure everyone stays to the end, because we've got a little bit of a fun rapid fire for each of them to bring it all home. So here's my question. There's so much noise about metrics, analytics, KPI, what's the right, what's the wrong. There's the magic that, this dashboard will, enlighten everything. You're a growth focused company. You don't have your full formula built out yet. So you're looking to enter that scale up phase, right? You're growing, but you really want to bring the predictability to bear. How should you be thinking about and utilizing metrics, analytics, or whatever it is that you refer to it, to be able to make better, faster decisions? Or should you be thinking of it? I just realized I kind of threw what you should use it for on there, kind of gave my point of view. Should it be something other than better and faster decisions? Whoever's the most eager to give the answer, you get to jump on in.
I'll jump in. Listen, I think the biggest challenge that I see some of our startup high growth companies is why you're a high growth if you're in what we would refer to as a rising tide is lifting all boats, is the time to really understand your sales process. And understanding a sales process as a series of meetings you're trying to convert to keep the customer engaged to ultimately make a purchase of your solution. You have to rely on the data analytics on how things are progressing versus relying on interrogation of your sales team to try to piece the parts together. That is definitely the old world, and it's just going to take you way too long because, frankly, when you ask sales teams, sales reps what they're doing, they don't necessarily translate to actually what they're doing to be able to programatize what great looks like. And so you've got to get the data into the system to be able to drive the analytics.
Yeah, I'm happy to, because I couldn't agree with Todd more, and to expand a little bit about how we've taken that approach here at DataBox is really to make sure that the metrics and analytics are driving the right behaviors across your team. And I think a big part of that is really bringing that data and making it more accessible for both the managers of teams and the individual contributors doing the work to understand how the work that they do each and every single day contributes to that bottom line, whether it's growing revenue or improving retention. So, we really try to think about it as a way to both manage performance and drive alignment across teams by making sure that each group is focused on the right metrics that contribute to their part of whatever they are responsible for in the sales cycle. So actually, as a quick example of that, our support team regularly will help our customers in building dashboards. It's a way of reducing friction and helping them to understand the capabilities of the software. And we're able to set a target on the number of dashboards that they create based off of other inputs like close rate and how much revenue we need to generate each month. And that's something we talk about regularly all the way down to the individual contributor level so they can see exactly the results of their work.
So yeah, I think all that makes total sense. One of the things, so first thing you got to do, you got to instrument your business so that the important data, you can capture it. But I think the one problem that a lot of people run into is they've got too much data and they don't know what to do with it. And so, how do you make it actionable? It's like really connecting, well, is this a metric that's just going to be there as a vanity metric or something that, people start ignoring? And if you got too much data, that's what happens. And so it's really about thinking through what are the 1 or 2 metrics for any individual or the 3 to 5 metrics as a company that really matter and making sure that you're got a really tight hold on them, you're tracking them, whatever makes sense in your business, but probably not less frequently than weekly, right? You got a sense of daily, at least weekly change so that it drives behaviors in your organization. It keeps people focused in your daily and weekly meetings around what you should be doing to drive that metric. And if you do, and that those set of small metrics will change over time. So you've got to be reassessing them, whether it's, monthly or quarterly or whatever. You got to be reassessing those metrics and make sure that the ones that are most important to your business at that moment are the ones that are at the top of your dashboard or whatever it is you're using.
Yeah, I think just one additional comment, Doug, because on top of Raj's, because I think he made some really key points. Less is definitely better. And you got to spend the time to make sure that people understand why this is an important measurement. So I like to, the what and the why. What are we measuring and why? And then the next thing that I've found is that if you've got to spend the time to make sure that people understand what's the data source. Because if you're going to deliver metrics, especially anything that's ranking or comparing organizational people, take the debate out of it relative to, is the number reporting the right number? So I find up front, what, why, where's the data coming from are 2 critical steps to be able to drive the behavioral change that the focus from delivering on that metric. You want that behavioral change. Those are 2 key steps.
So let me tack on that, Todd, because you all kind of hit on this. And Todd, you mentioned this specifically. One of the concerns that I get regularly when I'm talking to my clients is, they're concerned that they can't trust their database, right? They're concerned they can't trust their CRM. You've got, it's funny when a salesperson's doing really well, they tend to log more of their stuff. They log more of their activity in the CRM. When, they hit a bump, all of a sudden, not so much. How do you make sure that you do have the right data integrity so that you can begin to become data driven?
What I find a lot of times is when I'm in an organization, identifying those 3 to 5 key metrics, a lot of times getting the data is a manual process to start because the systems aren't there to get it to you. And so you have to invest the time to make sure that manual process has integrity and the results can't be debated. Typically, I find that if there's debate in the first 30 days, I know I have their attention. If there's no debate, then they're not listening. And if you lose integrity of them believing the number, you're never going to drive the behavior. But the second key then is if you've established the right 3 to 5 and they have a life, it gives your ops team now time to automate that data to be able to report on it more in a more automated manner. If you're changing metrics every 30, 60 days, then it's always a manual process and you are chasing your tail. So Doug, typically is very manual up front, and you got to spend the time to make sure that there's no debates on what that manual process that ultimately you automate delivers, because you want no debates that where I'm sitting relative to my peers, knowing I've got to go focus. I don't want any debates relative to what it says for me.
So Todd, I'm going to let you get slightly commercial here for a second, though I'm not going to let you get too commercial. I know at Insight Squared, you guys have taken an approach to solve that problem. And one of the things you mentioned to me was that if I have to enter the data, then I can't count on the data. So how have you guys solved that problem to be beyond manual?
Well, I mean, so everything we've been talking about to date, a lot of times these metrics are not necessarily stuff that we're going to go solve. I mean, there's typically a lot of these metrics come from your ERP system, come from your CRM system. They come from a variety of systems that you've got to automate. But to your point, what you're asking is that one of the big challenges in the revenue process is that we haven't had the data relative to engagement level, because the data source is the rep or the SC. And SCs are even worse than reps. There's just no ROI to keep CRM up to date for the rep. And so I don't care if we use carrot or stick approach to trying to get reps to give you data. After spending 25, 30 years, I'm here to tell you, neither one of those approaches are going to work. You have to get the reps out of the data entry business. And there's now really good technology that can automate the capture of engagement data. And it's so voluminous that you're also going to need to have a machine learning engine that can help analyze and interpret, provide the insights. Because if you're going to rely on ops to do that, it's going to overwhelm them. This is not do a dump to Google Sheets or to Excel. It's too voluminous. So you're going to need, now the good news is there's now new technology to get the data and do the machine learning for you to get the insights on a deal and on your overall funnel to drive a set of metrics that were not possible 2-3 years ago.
So Billy, I know one of the things that DataBox brings to the table is the ability to just mash up basically any source or system that you're using. You can mash up data. How do you guys work with people? How do your best customers find that right place where it's the right amount of data sources, the right amount of metrics to really separate the signal from the noise?
Yeah, that's a great question.
You're on mute.
So,
no, I hear
can you hear me now? Great question. One of the techniques and strategies that we recommend really to anybody who's checking out DataBox and that we're working with is to start by having an overview dashboard that, again, really focuses on those top 3 to 5 KPIs. And that becomes what you're reviewing during that weekly meeting that Raj mentioned, and what the focus is with updates, and anything that you're sharing centers around the impact of those key data points. But then what we recommend is, if you want to be able to drill down and tell more of a story, that subsequent dashboards are the place to do that, where you might provide more granular data that's looked at as needed or by the individuals, where they have the context necessary to actually analyze that in a way that's meaningful. And I think that's another big piece, right? That Todd was referencing, I think getting at regarding, trying to gather information from the reps or the SEs and some of the, mistakes or failures that can happen if you're relying on manual data entry. None of this data really matters if you don't understand your customers and aren't talking to them regularly to have the context to be able to interpret it. I talk with customers each and every single week, and I could analyze data all day long as to my sales team's performance, how many calls they're conducting, how long they are, whatever the case may be. But without understanding what the customers are trying to accomplish and where they're getting stuck, it's hard to make sense of exactly what matters and what to focus on. So making the customer a central part of that story and analysis, I think is critical, both to, pulling out those key insights and making those good strategic decisions, but also in getting the rest of the team on board with understanding why these different data points are important.
Yeah, I think that connects back to what Todd talked about. If the why of the metric isn't clear to everybody, then it's not really going to resonate. Now, Raj, they set you up. I don't know if you noticed that or not, but they set you up, right? You said leading off that the problem today is that we're measuring too much, and everyone has agreed, getting into that 3 to 5. Right, you know what I'm about to ask you. How do you figure out what those 3 to 5 are?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, look, I feel like it's been touched on, right? You got to understand, what is it that's driving your business? What's the most important thing to you, right? And if you think about, like, sometimes you can make the excuse that we're too early stage for metrics, right? But that's bullshit, right? Because, even in your very earliest stage and you're trying to figure out product market fit, well, maybe your key metric is the number of conversations you're having a week, right, with people in the market. And if you don't write that number down as a target and know what you're doing, it's really hard to optimize towards it. And so you've just got to be thinking about your business on a regular basis of what are the most important things we're doing to drive our strategic goals, whether those goals are figure out product market fit, whether it's drive the highest number of sales, whether it's to drive efficiency in your sales model or something else. You've got to have that discussion, probably on a monthly, quarterly basis, and figure out what are the underlying metrics, the leading metrics that are going to drive those goals, and then push towards them.
I think what he just said there was really key, Doug. It's the leading indicators of achieving the end outcome. And the only way you can do that is if you want an end outcome of new logos, cross sells, whatever the case may be, you have to know what the process is and what the friction points are. And if you want focus on a particular key component, key friction point, or key stage, and you've helped people understand why these are critical to drive the end outcome, why we're going to look at this every week or month. If you can connect those dots for people, then you will drive the focus on improving the execution on that key area. And once you solve that, then you go to the next weak link. There's always a weak link from an execution. That's an indicator of ultimate end outcome.
Yep.
So I've got a take on this that I'll share in a minute, but I want to challenge you guys to dig here a little bit deeper. I'm a company. I'm doing $80 million in sales. I've got 35 salespeople. I want to be a $500 million company. We're good. We're not great. We know we're growing, but there's that. We have to squeeze harder to get the juice, and the cost model isn't quite right. So we don't have it all dialed in yet. We don't know what that math is yet. We're trying to figure it out. So like, what would you do in that situation to get to the 3 to 5 so that you're measuring and looking at and thinking about the right things? And then how would that become actionable?
So, I think this harkening back to our last conversation on our webinar around hypothesis-driven approaches, right? So at that point, you as a company leaders probably have some intuitions on what it is that takes you from 80 million to 500 million, right? Is it, hey, we got to increase the size of our deals? Do we got to increase the top of the funnel? Do we got to increase win rate somewhere? And basically use those hypotheses to drive what are the metrics that are going to be indicative of us performing well at this? And then as we achieve those goals, is it helping us towards our overall goals? And it might not be just one, it might not be one thing, but as everybody said, it probably shouldn't be too many things, because then you're going to get distracted as an organization and never focus in on the things that are having a material impact that you can have a material impact on as an org.
What would you guys do?
I think when you're at that kind of stage, the ability to continue to scale growth requires a much tighter alignment cross-functionally to be able to scale execution. And I see far too many times, I've lived in my own experience, where if you have a set of metrics and a set of systems and a set of data that is functionally driven and not aligned across the revenue processes, it can become very difficult. And so what I see is that the companies that are able to successfully navigate that are really thinking about it holistically. That's where you see this trend around a revenue ops function, to be able to start to look at your tech stack and your data, to be able to look at holistically, rather than spending times in QBRs or monthly business reviews of one function's data says this, the other function says that, and you spend more time trying to coalesce the data when you really want to get alignment as what's the realities of your business? Where are the friction points? Is it lead source? Is it lead quality? Is it lead SLA's conversion? Is it win rate? Is it, do you win less when competitor XYZ comes in? If you can get one version of the data to align functionally to address on those 3 to 5 key inflection points or friction points in your sales process, that's the difference for me between those companies that move from 80 all the way up or those that struggle along.
To kind of expand upon what Todd was saying there, and something you mentioned earlier, you use the word outcome. What's the outcome of whatever work that we're doing and that we're producing, whether it's chats or calls or meetings booked, things that indicate some level of activity. I think a lot of the outcome metrics remain the same, whether it's retention or new revenue or total revenue, but that what we would refer to a data box as output metrics, the activity-based metrics, is what might change on a quarterly basis. So we spend a lot of time, and I talk about this with any customer that I get on the phone with, is going through a more rigorous quarterly planning process and then communicating that out throughout the organization over meetings in writing, so that people can read it on their own time, and telling that story and being clear as to why we believe, both with quantitative and qualitative data, that improving a particular output metric, like for example, the number of calls that we're delivering, is going to result in a greater outcome for metrics that are consistent and talked about regularly within the company.
We've got some good questions coming in through the chat and Q&A, and I'm going to ask them in a second. I want to highlight a couple things that were just said and put forth a thought. So please keep them coming. I will get to them as best I can. So Billy, I think you just said something that people mistake regularly, which is we talk about metrics, we talk about analytics, we talk about data, and we think numbers, and everything becomes quantitative. And we forget that just because you can't put it into a number does not mean that it's not data, doesn't mean that it can't be analyzed, if you will. So it is balancing that qualitative and that quantitative. It's a baseball guy. It's a mixture of the analytics and the C test, right? How does that all come together? I think the other thing that's coming clear here is that analytics work when you do the foundational stuff first. So one of the things that I talk about is every company should go through the process of conducting a what causes sales analysis. Figure out what is that thing that has, in your opinion, initially, a causal relationship. If you could push this button, just pushing that button would cause sales to go up. Then do a what causes sales analysis, right? And things will change, it'll break down, but connecting on what Raj said, the hypothesis is really what drives the outcomes, right? The hypothesis is what drives the value of the data. To me, data is best used when it prompts insightful questions far more than when it provides answers. But I think where we have a tendency to make the mistake when we look to the data to give us the answer. So my question for you is, how do you use data? Give us an example where you've used your data, your metrics, your analytics to prompt a question that led to an insight for your organization.
Let me jump in. I mean, I think what you said is really important, is that the purpose of, well, two things. One, listen, you don't need to go do a big consulting engagement to map out the whole journey.
Hey, hold on a second here, Todd. Now, wait, I said I wouldn't say anything bad.
No, you may need help to figure out what you do differently.
You're right.
You know, but I often find that, customers get, anxious about it. Intuitively what the key inflection points are. The way I've used metrics in the past is, if you get people to understand what we're focused on and why, and you get them to understand here's how we're doing against it within the organization, I find putting relative performances across the organization is a key motivator. But I don't necessarily give the answers, here's what you do to improve it. It's empowering to the people that are in the trenches to help figure out, how do I improve this step in the process? How do I improve execution? There's always some people in the organization that are doing better. There's your internal benchmarks. But your whole purpose on creating focus is to get the people that are closest to the action to help identify what the improvement plans are. It's not, here's the metric, here's why, here's how we're going to measure it, and here's what you're going to do. It's like, unleash the creativity of those closest to tell you how to turn the dials to improve execution. That's when that's happening. Now you got a process that's working.
Raj, how have you done it?
So the thing that's difficult is sometimes when you're just looking at a number on its own, what to make of it. What is the question behind it? Is there an intelligent question to be asked? So it's about putting some context next to it, right? And that context can be time. So this has increased, has dipped, right? And there's some questions. So like a lot of the questions for me are around, where our stages around retention and engagement. Sometimes it's hard to know, is like, 50% retention, good or bad, right? For where we should be, because we're an earlier stage product. But what I can see is, okay, that's dipped. Our cohort from last week is much worse than the usual cohorts. Why? Let's understand that and get smarter about it. The other piece where you can get it is benchmarks, right? As Todd mentioned, around the internal benchmarks. But if you can get external benchmarks around, hey, here's where some companies typically are. Do we feel right about this? It's not going to be a full answer because your business is different, but at least it gives you some guide for why things are happening. And so, and then there's this next layer that's also been talked about is, can you use ML and sort of data science to get to a deeper level of questions about the data, find potential anomalies. And those anomalies aren't going to give you an answer necessarily, but it'll help you say, okay, I need to explore a little bit deeper. Here's a rep. There's something going wrong here, right? Here's a region. There's something that's like, weird here. And all of those things give you more questions to ask, get smarter about your business, improve your hypotheses.
If you guys could only use one metric, what would it be?
One metric?
Yeah, what would you say is the metric that's the most important metric for you that you've discovered?
At this given time kind of thing?
However you want to answer it. In your experience at this given time. So like some of the questions we're asking is, what's the one metric that sales and marketing should own? What's the most important metric?
I'd be happy to answer that. To me, it's revenue retention. I feel like it's a metric that both represents, because of the number of inputs that go into revenue retention, it represents your ability to bring on new prospective customers, retain those customers, and help those customers be more successful over time. So that's something I'm constantly looking at, is what is our revenue retention, which, also factors in how much additional revenue that you're generating from existing customers. And that typically is a sign of them being successful with your platform and growing with it, especially if you have a pricing structure that is aligned to the value that they get from your tool. So I think revenue retention for me is the number one metric that kind of represents the health of the business and the value that your customers are getting from your product.
So let me put you on the spot now. right? Let me take that. And I know that a lot of people are asking this. And I know when I talk to my clients, this is the question that I get in response. Totally agree with that. What are the 3 metrics that you would use, in our 3 to 5, that would be that leading indicator? Because the trouble, I agree with that revenue retention is the number, but I would say that's a lagging number, not a leading number. So
Right.
how do you turn that to be actionable so that I'm pointing forward and taking better actions and leading to more predictability?
Yeah, great question. So I think definitely one of the major inputs to retention is how well you're able to support your customers. So some of the more output related metrics I would look at would be the number of support cases that we're getting, which doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. A lot of times people are reaching out because they need help and they're trying to accomplish something that they're just stuck with. It's not always a bug or an issue. So in many ways, we look at it as an opportunity to engage with that prospect, help them with whatever they need assistance with, but also identify other opportunities for them to expand their usage. And related to that, I'm also regularly looking at our response time, because I think for any and all businesses, you need to be getting back to customers quickly. If you're not responding, then they might abandon your app or give up on whatever they're trying to accomplish, and certainly impacts the customer experience. So understanding from the support side of things, how often are customers seeking assistance, and how quickly are we able to provide that assistance back to them? That would just be a couple of metrics, Doug, that I would look at related to revenue retention.
Doug, the way I'd answer that question is, I think there's a couple underlying metrics that are the forward indicators. For me, the number one is usage. So do you know what the user profiles are in your customer, and what is the usage of that? Because usage is the number one indicator that they're using it. It's integrated into their systems. If you have usage, then you should be in pretty good shape relative to retention and driving a gross number, which is the starting point for net. To Billy's point, there's other elements. Are you responding? And from a support standpoint, all lead to them continuing to use. The second one that we would look at is, if you've got good usage, now what's your conversion rates of opportunities to cross-sell, upsell? So how well are we able to leverage a core platform that's being used into added feature functions that are billable to drive added ARR growth from each customer? So for me, it's 2: usage, and then cross-sell funnel conversion. You do that, you got a good net number. Sorry, Raj.
Yeah, no, I think all of that makes sense. And obviously it's going to be completely different for the business and the stage you're in. But I think the broader point I'd make is the numbers can fool you, right? And you've got to be really thoughtful about the numbers. I'll give you just one example. When you're in a fast growth phase, and you're looking at your net churn number, right? So, and it looks good because it's more than 100%. And you're like, things are great. And a lot of times you might have a head of sales, a head of customer success, CRO, focus in on that number. But what it hides in that phase is that maybe gross churn is actually pretty bad, right? And once your growth starts leveling up, that catches up really quickly. And if you're not asking the right questions, going to the right level of depth, and just kind of trusting your leaders in the org to kind of drive the numbers rather than thinking about what numbers actually make sense for your business, you could get undercut.
Look, Rod, just because I was talking to a prospect a couple of years ago who told me that their retention was great, and it turned out they'd only been in business for 7 months.
Yep.
But I said, well, I hope you don't have a retention problem. So I hear you there. On that point, let's kind of shift this up a little bit. Let's talk about some of the myths and mistakes, right? Because again, I think there's, I think half of getting metrics right and using analytics right is to learn how not to use it, right? And there's so much out there. There's that old phrase, John Wanamaker said, I know I'm losing 50% of my money on advertising. My problem is I don't know which 50%. That's led to all kinds of craziness. What's the common best practice out there about metrics and analytics that every time you see that, it makes your skin crawl, because that it's not everyone, but most people believe it, but it's not true? In essence, what's the worst thing that you hear regularly talked about how to use analytics?
I mean, I think it connects to maybe what I was saying earlier, but like, oh, let's boil the ocean and figure out what all of this data is. Big data world now, and we've got to, get all of our data into a data warehouse, and we got to crunch it all, and then the answer will kind of present itself. And for the reason we talked about at the beginning, that's usually a dead end. And coming with a hypothesis-driven approach that centers you in on a few key metrics, and you examine those, be willing to be wrong about that being a meaningful metric, and say, hey, my hypothesis was wrong, I got to go understand something else, typically leads to a quicker, more actionable result.
Yeah, I mean, when I have an interesting vantage point because I get to see all my customers' dashboards. And the biggest mistake I continually see is just way too much. Like I have a 2-screen rule. Like if you have more than 2 screens of charts, of dashboards, of metrics, you are probably losing focus and interest. Like I never get to the 3rd screen. So I will see ops teams do this all the time. They'll create dashboards anticipating every possible question that each function wants, and it results in a dashboard being so voluminous that frankly, most people don't know what most of the dashboards are saying. And so that's the biggest mistake I see all the time. Keep it simple, keep it so that you can keep the attention on a regular basis, and it doesn't get diluted with volume.
Yeah,
Billy, you have to see a lot where you are.
I couldn't agree with Todd more. In fact, oftentimes when I get on the call or I'm listening to one of my team's calls with a prospective customer, I see these dashboards that have 15, 16 metrics crammed into it. They try to get everything onto one screen. You can't make any sense of it. And to Todd's point, I think in most cases, those dashboards get abandoned and don't actually get used for their intended purpose. So, I think going back to your original question there, Doug, and something that Raj has brought up on a bunch of occasions, Todd here as well, is that, the data isn't going to give you the answer. It's really the data combined with your knowledge of the state of your business, how old your business is and what the reasons why retention might be good or bad and the factors that are influencing that. And then again, going back to the customer, being able to pair the metric back to something that about the customer base, the pain points, the challenges, what you hear from them in terms of where they're getting stuck. All of that information needs to be a part of the story. So there's really nothing that you can do without that contextual information. I think it's nearly impossible to look at a data point and draw a conclusion without having firsthand direct knowledge of your customer.
Yeah, the other thing, Doug, that I would just add is what I see a lot is that if you're going to drive focus, make sure that the changes your teams are making are sustainable change. It's not just focus driving an outcome, because what I also see is mistake number 2 is once you've got that to where you want it to be from a benchmark standpoint, you move on to the next week link, and you start looking at another set of metrics. You take your eye off the ball on the one you think you solved, and then the results start to drop off. So focus, the continual cadence of focus will drive behavioral change and results, but you got to make sure that the behavioral change is programmatized, it's sustainable. And don't make the mistake of assuming once you've achieved it, you don't need to look at it anymore, because I've made this mistake so many times. Once you stop looking at something, then that's the message to the organization that it's no longer important. And they go to the shiny object and the execution starts to tail off a bit.
Ooh, I'm going to circle back to that, Todd. There's a big one on that. I'm going to share with you the two things that I hear all the time that just make the hair on the back of my neck just go. The first one is you need to run an A/B test. Let's run an A/B test. Especially when someone has, I get 1,000 visits to my website every month. We need to run an A/B test. The other one that is actually even bigger than this is that results are all that matters. Right. And I think that's actually the biggest mistake when it comes to using analytics effectively. One of my favorite titles for a book that was also a good book was by Bill Walsh, who wrote The Score Takes Care of Itself. And I was a baseball coach. I was a hitting instructor. And what I worked constantly at with my team is have a good at bat, right? Put the bat on the ball. After that, you have no control over it, right? So what is the input that leads to outcomes? Focus on that, then let the results take care of themselves. So that's my, let me give the flip side of it. For you guys personally, what's the lesson in this area that you find yourself always having to relearn? You know it's true, but it's a learned behavior rather than that natural, and you find yourself going, oh yeah, that's right.
Go ahead, Raj.
So I was just going to say that people end up over optimizing towards metrics. Metrics are really important, but then when they don't change and they don't adapt, people over optimize towards them, and other things start falling off. So as a leader of a department or an organization, you got to just constantly be thinking about how people are reacting to those metrics, be ready to change them as things change.
I just want to piggyback on that as a great example of this. I was working with this is several years ago, a small professional services company. This was not directly related to what I was working with them on, but they had just kicked in an initiative around tracking hours and allocating hours to the projects that they were working on. And they were like 13 people. Right, there were 13 people in the company, and it was creating all kinds of friction, and there were challenges, and they were trying to figure. And I said, "Why are you guys tracking hours?" And they said, "Well, we need to track hours to know if our work's profitable." And I looked at them and I said, "Do you have more money in your account at the end of the month than you had at the beginning of the month?" Right? If the answer is yes, you're profitable. If the answer is no, you're not profitable. It's like you have 13 people, right? Like you're not McKinsey. Right? You're not the CFO at McKinsey that needs to track that there's 300 people working on a project, or, so I think that kind of gets to what you're saying as well, which is kind of where are you? What is the problem that you're really looking to solve? What about anybody else? What's the lessons that you guys you find yourself relearning in this area?
Yeah. I think for me, and again, it's been mentioned a couple of times here, but anticipating how a new initiative or a new target that you're setting or a new metric that you're introducing is going to impact the team's behaviors. I think that that's critical, and understanding the ways in which they plan to achieve that target. And obviously a part of it is outlining to them what's expected and training them. But then, when they actually start doing the work, there's all sorts of things that you're not going to have visibility into unless you talk with them. So trying your best to understand and ask them questions as to how they expect this to change their workflow or what they're prioritizing, and making sure that whatever metric you've introduced actually has the intended behavior. Because I think we've all likely seen instances where it doesn't, and people are maybe able to achieve the result that you're looking for them to achieve, but in a way that isn't healthy for the business or sustainable long term. So how is this going to influence, especially on the individual contributor level, how they go about their work?
You just hit the number one law of unexpected consequences of metrics and analytics. As a matter of fact, it's so normal. It's got its own law, Goodhart's law. It says the moment you take a good measure and you turn it into an objective, it stops being a good measure. The moment you start saying that metric is what matters, that is going to change things, and you need to be prepared for that. I think that's a tremendous lesson. I agree with you 100%. Todd, what about you?
The thing that I've learned many times over the years is that the consistency by which you look at it and the details by which you understand what's behind the metric are really important. You can't engage your team, you can't coach your team if you don't understand what's the process behind it. To both learn as the improvements are made. And so the biggest lesson I've learned is just putting a metric out and just assuming everybody's going to focus on it and get and drive improvement. Wow, it's just no matter how high up in the organization you go, what I've learned a million times doesn't work that way. That if it's important, if it's one of the top 3 to 4, you have to invest the time into the root causes, what's behind the process, especially after you get it back going. But then now you're watching it in a monitoring way. If it starts to fall off kilter, you know exactly where to go poke to get it back on track. You cannot be removed from what's behind the metric, because if it's superficial, your team will figure that out really quick, and they'll give you the commensurate focus that will translate to it being superficial.
Amen. Amen. For me, there's two lessons. They're kind of connected. When you're using metrics to support change, you can only change one thing at a time.
Yeah.
And that kind of connects to Todd, what you were talking about. You can't have 17 dashboards. And actually, one of the things I've done to manage that is I'm a big believer in what I call player scorecards and manager scorecards, right? Like, you want your players to know the score. And for that, it's all about data curation. Yeah, my ops team might be tracking 17 different metrics, but if I'm sharing more than one or two from a change standpoint, I've defeated myself before I've started, which connects to the second lesson. And I have to learn this every day. Oh, This is so unnatural for me. It's better to have small, consistent progress than big leaps. Yeah, and I always look for that big insight that's just going to change the game.
I think the other thing that I've also learned is make sure you take the time to understand from your ops team what it's going to take to get that data.
Yeah.
I've made the mistake of finding out 3 to 4 months in that got a couple of key metrics that you want in that Monday staff meeting. And I find out I've got 3 or 4 people working through the weekend to get it, and they don't bother to tell me. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't know that. I don't want you working through the weekend. Like, you got to help me understand what's possible. And if that Monday meeting should be Tuesday, or geez, we just don't have that data, you have to be realistic with what you can report on, so you don't overtax the system.
Yeah, and a lot of times on that, you can say, we don't have that data report on that, and the conversation switches to, well, what would be a good signal for that, right? And you might find that there's another piece of data that you have that's not spot on, but can at least begin to give you a directional level so that you're moving to action.
Amen.
Todd, I want to circle to what you said, because you all do this, right? Your products are great, right? And for those of you that aren't familiar with the products, I mean, I chose very selectively who we were going to have on this session. Legitimate. We use all your products. They're top notch. But I have one problem with all of them. They make it so easy for me to track things. You've automated the tracking. You've removed the friction from the tracking. You know what happens? I forget they're there. Right? When I had to prepare that weekly report, it was a pain in the butt, but it made me look at it. And Todd, you talked about the fact, if you don't keep looking at it, and what happens is we start tracking it because it's a problem. And then because we're paying attention to it, it gets better. And then it stops being the shiny toy. And because it's all like, I know I can look at it at any moment, so I never look at it. So how do you solve that? How do you take advantage of the deep work that you guys do and eliminating that low value friction, but keep what matters in front of you when you need to see it? How do you do that?
We're going to solve it by creating a harder version for you. So
I know you're worried. It's called the Davidoff. It's
That's right.
It's the Davidoff version.
Look, I think that this all comes down to your operating system as a company, and how do you surface these metrics to make them top of mind and actionable in the right way. And everybody will have a different view on what the right operating system for their company is. For us, this is about a dashboard that drives both our weekly meetings as well as our daily stand-ups, where those metrics are there. And right below those metrics are sort of like the key objectives, right? A very small number per individual in that meeting, so that we're always looking at the things that we're doing and how they connect to those metrics. And we're forced to put those up every day. For us, we do that out of a Google Sheet. But the more important thing is that they're there in front of you. They're part of the conversation as you're thinking about how you did and what you should be focused on next.
Yeah, to me, I think the key, Doug, is that you have dashboards, the intelligence of dashboards around being interactive to do drill down become much more important. If you have the ability to drill down to understand why did we do well this week, or why didn't we, to be able to get to the root cause without having to go to ops to get different, report outs or exports. If you empower a rep, a first line manager, a theater leader to be able to analyze their data without a lot of ops support. You empower them to continually monitor what's behind the performance. I think that's the key. It's being able to do the interactive aspects, to interpret the data, to know where to make mid-course corrections or double down, we're doing the right things, or change course.
Yeah, if I can share and just comment on a couple of points that Todd and Raj meant or just said. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, if you've got those 3 to 5 KPIs on an overview dashboard that you look at daily, that should allow you to understand what's worth digging deeper into on a more granular level or drill down. And then I try to make it as easy as possible for you to get to that next dashboard. And what I'm really looking for is changes that are different from what I would expect. And oftentimes that's related to goals that we have set that we think are achievable based off of, how many employees we have and what we expect their productivity to be. And then if it's not, it gives me something to drill deeper into. I always will pair that with talking with the rep, talking with the team to get their understanding or thoughts as to why something's happening. So as a quick story, we saw the number of customers who had booked calls with us not show up start to increase. And I could have drawn a number of different conclusions as to why, but instead I just asked the team and they provided a very logical reason as to why, which is the calls are being booked further out. So the prospect loses momentum from when the meeting was scheduled to when the call was going to take place. I couldn't figure that out by looking at a dashboard, but it did give me some insight into what I need to learn more about, and then subsequently the steps to take in talking with the team to understand why the data is changing.
Alrighty, I'm going to sum up what I've heard from this session, and then we're going to go into rapid fire. The key to a strong base for analytics is the work you do before you get to the analytics. What is that hypothesis? What is normal? What is not normal? If you're interpreting the data at the point that you're seeing it, that's where you go wrong. If you have a basis and a rationale, then the data provides that insight to be able to iterate that hypothesis and that insight to lead to better outcomes. Everybody good with that summary? Alrighty, this is going to be the hard one for me because I'm going to ask each of you 4 questions. What we'll do is we'll do number 1 first. We'll go through the 3 of you and we'll just keep circling around like that. And the hard part for me is we don't have the time for me to make any comments. So you guys get to answer and I don't get to comment. We'll see. I think Raj is saying there's about a 20% probability that happens.
You're right.
Alrighty, Raj, why don't you lead us off? The biggest challenge facing growth-focused companies today is?
Competition. I mean, there's just so much money out there that's driving so much competition to a level that hasn't been seen before. It means that there's tons of sales and marketing dollars going into these spaces, and it's hard to know what to do with that. Do you spend that money to go after the growth? Do you focus on efficiency? And there is no good answer because we kind of don't know what the future will bring us, and that's a tough place to be. Wow,
Raj is just trying to tempt me. Todd, the biggest challenge facing growth-focused companies today is?
I think it's the whole skill set, development of the skill sets around the whole digital demand gen aspect of the business. In a fast growth, you've got to keep getting raw materials into the front of the funnel, and that's just an ever-changing component of the business that I find that's where companies are most struggling.
Billy, biggest challenge facing growth companies today is?
Yeah, I would say really lack of focus on the execution of new programs or initiatives. I think, Todd, you mentioned it earlier, that oftentimes you come up with something great, everyone's excited about it, and then there aren't measurements or metrics in place to understand and manage the team's performance to execute on that. So a lot of great ideas that otherwise would work just simply don't get executed on. And you'll never really know if it was going to be an effective part of your strategy moving forward. So I would say execution.
All right, Billy, flipping it on its head, the biggest opportunity for growth companies today is?
Biggest opportunity is empowering the people on the front lines, the individual contributors. I stand by the statement. Throughout my career, I find that the best ideas come from those working directly with customers. If you can make the data accessible, make it so that they understand each metric and what goes into it, they're going to come up with the best ideas that will really move the needle, and then be really excited about actioning those ideas. So empowering people on the front lines to access and understand the data, I think is critical.
Todd?
I think the biggest opportunity is now there's a level of data and machine learning analytics to be able to churn through it and identify the key insights to go focus like never before.
Raj?
Those were good ones. So maybe I'll focus in on look, the world we're in has been shaken up massively. And so how do you find the way to kind of come out on ahead as a result of that shakeup, right? Whether that means taking cost out of your sales process by being remote, whether it means, saving on office space while improving on culture. Think about the fact that the world has been shaken up. We don't exactly know where it's going to end up, but how can you improve where you are at so that you're outpacing your competition?
All right, my favorite question in the rapid fire, Raj, the mistake you've made with analytics that still shows up in your anxiety dreams is?
Not getting too deep enough to the right analytics, and therefore having the metric drive the wrong behaviors, and then just not being able to understand that in time.
Todd?
Short-term fixes to improve the results that don't scale over time. Tell my team all the time, is this fix, this process improvement going to scale when we're 2 times, 3 times, 4 times? Don't set it up so you got to redo it again 18 months from now.
You guys, you're making this hard for me.
Mine's the same as Todd, honestly. I actually had this conversation with a member of my team this morning where they were advocating for a change. And, a few months from now, I expect our sales team to be double the size, where that will no longer be an issue. So it just, yes, in the data, it shows something we need to address 100%, but it doesn't make sense to at this point, knowing what we know about, the future and what, will look like 6 months from now. So being really disciplined to not focus on those short-term fixes. And, if you're doing quarterly planning and committed to that execution, then you'll, avoid falling into those traps of just seeing the thing that you can fix now, but that may not be meaningful months later.
Yep.
Billy, for a company serious about growth, a strong approach to analytics is?
I know I sound like a broken record, but again, making that data accessible throughout the organization. That's one of the number one things I hear from prospective customers of data boxes. I don't even have access to the data, let alone, the knowledge and know how to analyze it. So just, making it accessible, sharing it regularly. Raj touched upon it, making it be a part of your operation and culture, that metrics and data are at the forefront.
Todd?
You have to have a strategy to automatically capture all of the engagement data with every customer-facing resource in your company. Do not rely on them to enter the data. It's a losing proposition. Get the data in. The only way you're going to be able to analyze it is with a robust machine learning engine, because there's too much data now. But it's the best way to indicate the health of your process, of your funnel, and any specific deals.
Raj?
Make sure that it all connects to an operating system that is well thought out. And if you don't have one, borrow one that exists. And the one that I use is it's outlined in Death by Meeting, right? Which is a book. Look it up, and it basically outlines your daily stand-up, your weekly tactical, your monthly strategic, and your quarterly offsite. But if you miss any one of those pieces, you'll miss a key part of how you handle your analytics. For example, if you're not doing your quarterly offsite, you'll stay focused on the same metrics too far. You're not reevaluating the underlying assumptions that are driving them.
Raj with Demand Sage, Billy with DataBox, Todd with Insight Squared. Guys, I could go on for another couple of hours. This was awesome. We will be sending this to everybody. We'll get everyone's contact information in there. I encourage you, check these guys out. They will save you time. They will make you smarter. They will help you truly execute hypothesis-driven growth. Guys, thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.